Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this third webinar we've been running this week. We are considering this as the beginning of an international forum. And with my co-host Jennifer Fox here today, we're very pleased from Aquaterra. We're very pleased to have you representing Ocean Energy Systems International and also ORJIP. And just in case, many of you have heard this from us before, but in case, Ocean Energy Systems is a community of nations under the International Energy Agency who have come together to help move marine renewable energy forward in development. And one of the tasks under OES is known as OES-Environmental. We have 15 of the nations who have committed to understanding environmental effects of marine renewables in a way that supports consenting or permitting. This particular task is led by the U.S. The U.S. Department of Energy is the lead with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We've been doing this for 10 years now in phases at 4 years at a time, and we at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory have been fortunate enough to implement this program. And this particular phase of OES Environmental ends next month, May 2020, and we'll be releasing the State of the Science Report 2020, which is a follow-up to that in 2016, which pulls together with authors and contributors from many countries what we really know about environmental effects of marine renewables. So I hope you'll look out for that. And then Jen, do you want to say a few words about ORJIP?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So ORJIP Ocean Energy is the Offshore Renewables Joint Industry Programme for Ocean Energy, which is a UK-wide collaborative programme that is tasked with reducing the consent uncertainty around the environmental effects of wave and tidal energy. And we do that through facilitating a strategic and coordinated research programme looking to prioritise the key research gaps and consenting risks specific to wave and tidal energy. The Secretariat for ORJIP Ocean Energy is run by Aquaterra, who I work for, and two other organisations called Marine Space and EMEC, or the European Marine Energy Centre. And one of the key pieces of work that we do as ORJIP Ocean Energy is called the Forward Look document, which is the key document that we gather together those key consenting risks and research gaps in a prioritised list, a research programme designed to facilitate that strategic and coordinated approach to filling those research gaps. We've done a couple of iterations of that document over the years that ORJIP has been in place, and we're working towards an updated version of the Forward Look, which will be coming out in the next couple of months.
Okay, if you've been on the last couple of days, you've heard this, so we'll try to go over it quickly. But the reason we're starting this international forum, and these 3 days of webinar is really the beginning, we want to be able to showcase the up-to-date research and monitoring that's going on around environmental effects of marine renewables. We want to demonstrate what monitoring techniques and technologies have been grown up for use in the industry. These technologies and techniques tend to come from research projects, but then the idea is to be able to make them operational for use around turbines or WECs. We also want to provide a broad access to the researchers and monitoring leads who are really at the forefront of understanding how we acquire information. And as we move forward, we really want to know what the community at large, what questions you have, what are your needs and interests, whether you're in the development, the regulatory, the research community. And this is the third of 3 days of webinars. On Tuesday, we had 5 speakers, actually, on updates and research and monitoring around turbines. Yesterday, we had some great speakers on integrated monitoring platforms for measuring around turbines specifically, and although it could be WECs as well. And today, we're really focusing on research and monitoring wave devices. And Jen is going to give you the lineup.
Sure. Thanks, Andrea. So we're going to kick off today's webinar with an overview of some of the key wave energy research and monitoring that has gone on to date. I'll lead on that with some of the key research studies that have come from the UK, and then Andrea is going to go through some of the key research that's happened on her side of the world in the US. We're then going to have Matthew Witt from the University of Exeter talking about an EU-funded project called Seawave. And then we're going to have Juan Ball from ASTI Tecnalia and Teresa Seamas from Benthic Offshore Renewables talking about a sister project, another EU-funded project called WESI. And finally, we'll have Anki Bender from Uppsala University talking about Lysekil.
Terrific.
So with that, I will kick us off and we'll go straight into the first presentation. So when we were talking and thinking about having this webinar session specific on the monitoring and the research that has gone on around wave energy devices, we wanted to make sure that we provided some context and some background information into what the key research gaps are and what some of the key monitoring that has happened to date around wave energy devices is. Next slide, please. So just to give an overview to start with, we talk a lot about the key environmental effects of wave and tidal energy as a whole, and collision risk often comes into that being one of the major uncertainties and the major risks within, as we call it, the marine energy sector as a whole. But when we focus in on wave energy, we need to have a look specifically at those effects that are concerned with wave energy devices specifically. And so I've highlighted some of the key ones here. Firstly, the use of wave energy areas by marine wildlife. So a key wave evidence gap is considered to be a full understanding of how marine wildlife use high energy areas and how that might be affected with the introduction of wave energy devices to those areas. Secondly, we've got underwater noise, which is fairly self-explanatory. And thirdly, we've got displacement effects. So are marine animals being pushed out of certain areas simply by the physical presence of wave energy devices? And finally, I've flagged here the consolidation of existing evidence. So it's a really key need to make sure that where there is monitoring and research being done, that is being consolidated and made available and disseminated in the right way. And data transferability is a key topic that we focused in a lot on in recent times, and making sure that where research is being done, that it is being used and being utilized to its best opportunity. And just to flag here, as I mentioned, this is all summarized within the ORJIP forward look. So I'm going to talk briefly about 5 key monitoring studies that have gone on around operational wave deployments in the UK. A number of these are around the Polaris Wave Power P2 device that was deployed at EMEC a number of years ago. So the first one here was an operational noise assessment on that Polaris P2 device when it was deployed at Billy Crew at EMEC. And the aim of this study was to develop an underwater noise measurement methodology. So there was a number of different approaches to this study. In particular, there was autonomous recorder units on the seabed and wideband boat-based drift deployments, and also CTD, or conductivity temperature depth casts, data taken. And you can see here from the time versus frequency spectrogram on the right-hand side there, that's an example of short-term noise events, so some of the key noises from the operational device being highlighted there. So some of the conclusions that were taken from this study was that the operational noise of the device did fall within the known hearing range of most of the marine mammal species that are known to be present at the EMEC site. The detectability of the device noise by marine species was considered to be dependent on the background noise, and that background noise was highly variable depending on sea state and also other noise sources such as boats. And finally, it was noted within the study that the background noise or the ambient noise in these shallow water, high energy areas is relatively poorly understood, and that further studies would be needed to gain a better understanding of the variability in that background or ambient noise level. Next slide, please. So we've got another study here from the Pelamis Wave Power P2 device. This was looking at the behavior of seabirds at the Pelamis P2 device, and this study was published in 2014. So the aim of the study was to examine the behavior of birds on the device and a particular look at the seasonal and temporal variation in that behavior. And this was a relatively simple study setup. There was an automated stills camera photographing the surface of the device at 5-minute intervals, 24 hours a day, during 3 different deployments across 1 year. And so overall, some of the key results from that study were that there was no presence of birds in February to March period. There was regular use of the machine for resting and roosting of the birds during May. There was a weak negative correlation between the presence of the birds and wave height, as can be seen in the bottom right-hand side graph there, showing the number of birds present on the machine under varying wave heights. There was no correlation seen between the presence of birds and the tidal cycle, and that's what's being shown in the bottom left circular graph there. The one on the left is showing Arctic terns, and the one on the right is showing kittiwakes. Number of birds present at different states of the tide. Those radial axes indicate the mean number of birds. And as you can see in the one on the right-hand side, which represents the kittiwakes, the only correlation that was noted was that the birds were only on the machine during the ebb tide. And finally, the final conclusion of this study was that it was a successful and low-cost methodology that was successfully implemented to monitor the behavior of birds around operational wave devices. Next slide, please. So a third study here that was done on the Pelamis Wave Power device when it was deployed at EMET was a study looking at the habitat use by seabirds. And this was particularly looking at the potential for displacement effects, as well as the density and presence of the birds around the wave energy device. Within this study, kernel density estimates were used to investigate the baseline seasonal and interannual variation in seabird distribution. And that change in distribution was studied as a result of the presence of the Pelamis device at EMEC. So there was baseline seabird observations carried out for 2 years prior to the installation of the device, and then post-installation seabird observations were carried out for an additional 2 years. During that time, there was a maximum of 2 of the devices being deployed at regular intervals. The study focused on these 4 seabird species that are pictured here. We've got the great skua in the top left, the Atlantic puffin, the northern fulmar in the bottom left, and the northern gannet in the bottom right there. And overall, the results of the study showed that there was high variation in that baseline distribution of these 4 seabird species. There was some increase in the density of the birds at mooring points for certain species and at certain times of the year. But overall, through this wide-ranging study, there was no avoidance behavior or significant change in the distribution of the birds recorded. Next slide, please. So moving away from Pelamis and to another wave energy device that has been deployed at the EMEC site, the Wello Penguin device. This is a study that was done to record noise data, specifically around the cooling system of that device, and this data was collected prior to the device's installation at EMEC. A pretty straightforward study here. The underwater sound pressure levels measured of the 2 cooling fans and 1 pump that were operating continuously within the device. And the results there showed that the noise profile was successfully measured, and the ambient background noise was expected to be greater than the noise profile once you were within 10 meters of the device. Next slide, please. So the final study that I'm going to briefly run through is from the Aquamarine Power Oyster 2 device. This was looking at the potential effects of the installation noise when the device was being planned to be deployed at the site in the Outer Hebrides. So in order to be able to do that impact assessment, baseline noise data was collected over a 12-day period at 2 sites in the Outer Hebrides where the deployment was intended to happen. And this was used along with construction noise, that is the drilling noise that was used during the installation of the device at EMEC, to develop a noise propagation model that could be chosen based on the water depth, the signal frequency, and the beam pattern of noise. And so using those 2 data sets and implementing the noise propagation model, it was seen that there was relatively low levels of noise generated through the drilling, and that noise propagated short distances before falling below background noise level. One key study, Southall et al., was used to examine the marine mammal underwater noise impact criteria, and it was seen that there would be no likely fatality or hearing damage, either permanent or temporary, to those marine mammal species. There was also seen that disturbance would be possible depending on the levels of background noise at the time, but overall the impact assessment concluded that the impact would be negligible. And that takes me to the end of my slides. Andrea, over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Jen. So I want to talk just very briefly about some investigation into wave effects that's gone on in the U.S. and a couple of other places. And we have focused a fair amount on effects on benthos, noise, also in electromagnetic fields, which of course crosses tidal as well as wave, but I want to just point out a few of those and a few of the other possible effects. Now, we don't have the same amount of deployment, nobody does, as the UK, so that some of these, a great many of these kinds of studies have taken place at test centers. This is our Wave Energy Test Center, or WETS, owned by the U.S. Navy. It's on the north side of Oahu Island and the Hawaiian Islands. And you see along the left-hand column some of the projects that have been wave devices that have been tested there to date. And the Azura in the first 2, they have been taking wave measurements there. The Fred Olsen Lifesaver, also a couple of different iterations of that. They've also been taking noise measurements, and I'll mention that one a little bit later. In the lower middle, the Ocean Energy 35 has been installed at WETS, and they will be taking noise measurements. They're just not quite there yet. We have a number of other projects coming in there. But overall, the WETS staff have been testing underwater noise. They've been looking at benthic community changes, and they've also been looking at disturbances of marine mammals. This is the overwintering area for a very large part of the humpback whale population in the eastern Pacific. So it becomes very important there. There's also been work done at our developing wave test site known as PacWave, which is a full open ocean site on the west coast off Oregon, run by Oregon State University. And there's been a lot of community analysis of benthos carried out there to really understand what the before condition is, because we simply don't have a lot of baseline information. There are 2 different PacWave sites, PacWave North. They're both fully energetic sites. PacWave North is smaller, and it is not grid connected, whereas PacWave South will have a total of 5 berths, as you can see in that upper right-hand diagram, by the time they're done. And what you're seeing in the photos on top, the Azura device is in the middle, that they've done the wave noise measurements around. They've also done measurements for electromagnetic fields off Azura and a couple of other smaller devices. And the left-hand photo is their Ocean Sentinel Nomad buoy, which is used for both data collection. It's also got a load cell and so on. And so the main thing here is that they're trying to really characterize the site, as they have with EMAC, to really understand what kinds of changes we might see as more wave devices come in online. But probably the most extensive work that's been done here has been the Benthic community analysis all up and down the coast. Okay, moving to underwater noise. I want to spend a little bit of time on this because I think this is the tricky one that is going to be the hardest for wave developers. We are very fortunate in the States because we have some regulatory thresholds. I don't expect you to take in much of these complicated tables, but the upper layer of them are the marine mammal regulatory thresholds put forward for different hearing groups of marine mammals, because we know that you can't lump all marine mammals together. The left-hand table 6 is made up of the temporary threshold shift levels, and this is all for non-impulsive sound, in other words, not pile driving, but operational noise in the MRE context. The right-hand table is the permanent threshold shift on sex. We also have a set of guidance, not regulatory mechanisms at this point, on the lower part, which is for fish. And fish, of course, are affected not by the wave part, but by the particle motion portion of a wave energy. So these are very different kinds of criteria. But with these available, and also we now have an international standard under the International Electrochemical Commission, TC 114. There is a standard of how to measure noise coming out of the marine energy device. And with those thresholds and this standardized method, we think we can really hone in on where we are. And just a couple of examples where noise has been measured. This has been done by the University of Washington out at WETS, the Wave Energy Test Site in Hawaii, using the Fred Olson Lifesaver. This is a big toroidal device with 3 point absorbers, if you will, chambers in it. And there were measurements taken 2 different ways, with seabed-mounted hydrophones and also with drifting hydrophones. This becomes very important because the seabed-mounted hydrophones tend to cut off the lower frequency sounds due to flow noise. So it's been really important to understand whether you're really measuring the device or some kind of background. And this is just one of many, many examples of looking at both amplitude over frequency for this device. And by parsing out the different pieces, what the mooring sounds like, the mooring chain, various other, out in Hawaii, snapping shrimp make a great deal of noise at some of the higher frequencies. This appears to be what the power takeoff sounds like. In that graph of amplitude versus frequency, the gray line is the manufacturer specs for what the output, they believe the output looks like, and the blue line with the fuzz around it is the measured output with confidence limits. And you see the pattern is pretty close to what the manufacturer believes, but there are some higher amplitudes in this 50 to 700 hertz range. So, but the great news is everything that we've measured so far falls below those action thresholds. And this is sort of the approach we're taking, at least in the U.S., and we'd like to promote further, that if we can measure these and they fall below levels we know to be damaging, perhaps we don't need to be as concerned about this. Okay, and this is just to remind you, this is actually a figure out of the upcoming State of the Science report. This is just to remind you that in the bottom is the hearing range for marine species, that all across this frequency range there is some animal that is listening. But we also have to understand where marine energy converters fall with all this other anthropogenic and natural sounds. And you see vessels, sub-bottom profilers, fisheries, acoustics, and all the sort of common natural noises and how those compare to marine renewable energy devices, as far as we know anyway. Okay, moving on, I want to just talk very briefly about electromagnetic field studies because there are many, many of these studies. We do not have in situ studies of marine renewable energy device export cables, EMF, but there's many studies, starting with the top one is the very iconic one that Andrew Gill and his colleagues did for Cowrie for offshore wind way back when. In 2009, where there were mesocosms placed on the seafloor with a cable running through each that could be alternately energized or not to act as a control and an experiment. And what they found with the organisms they purposely captured included a number of elasmobranchs, cat sharks, or on this side of the Atlantic we call them dogfish, and other elasmobranchs like skates definitely responded to the cable but did not appear to change their behavior in a way. Another key study from Westerberg and Langenfeld in 2008, they put acoustic trackers in the endangered European eel and watched as they crossed an energized cable. This was a power cable. And again, clearly the eels recognized the field and they slowed down, but there was little effect, and it did not seem to keep them from moving to their preferred habitats. Another key one in San Francisco Bay to look at migratory fish. There is a very large cable running down the middle of the bay, and they were very interested in looking at tagging and looking at Chinook salmon and migratory sturgeon. And what they found was there are many other electromagnetic signatures in the bay as well, but fish didn't seem to care. They crossed the cable very easily. They also tagged Chinook salmon smolts in case the smaller fish were affected, and found there really was no big change. Okay, last one I want to show you is some work that was done in the U.S., again, under Boehm's supervision, where they used 2 different species of commercially important crab, put big baited traps out there with a cable running, lying on top of the cable, put the crabs in one end, bait in another, to see if the crabs would willingly pass the cable to get to the bait. And if you've ever watched crabs go after food, there was no problem. They used the red rock crab in Santa Barbara and the Dungeness crab in Puget Sound, Santa Barbara, California, and in Puget Sound, Washington, with different types of cables, different levels of energized power going through them, and found that there was no problem with the crabs moving across them. Okay, I just want to end by pointing out that there are other kinds of wave effects that have at least been raised, whether they are substantial or not. The Carnegie deployments in Western Australia, these are the CETO-5, on your right, that's the CETO-5. It's a large point absorber, but it is subsurface. The biggest concern regulators had initially was for entanglement in the tether, because that is a large, off Western Australia, large migratory whale area. And this was dealt with fairly easily by really demonstrating the material that was used in this tether and at mooring line, and also the lack of bend to it, so that there really isn't much opportunity for the animal to become entangled. But this is something we hear about with wave energy, just like floating offshore wind. And then the CETO-5 is set up as a system off a Navy base off Garden Island in Australia to desalinate water. And as soon as desalination comes up, there are concerns about returning brine. In this case, this is such smaller amount of brine being put out compared to industrial desalination plants, which is where the comparison comes from, in places like Southern California, the Mediterranean, et cetera. And they were able to show that that was not an issue. Similarly, Resolute Marine, which is a U.S. company, you see on the left there, it's a big flap, somewhat similar to Aquamarine, and it is set up also to pump water to shore. They have a project under development in the Cape Verde Islands off South Africa, and again, as a desalination process, the return of the brine was of concern. And again, with modeling, it's fairly easy to show this is not going to be an environmental problem. But I think this is really the kind of thing we need to be thinking about with wave. What are we using the wave power for? Is it strictly electricity, or are there? Okay, and I think that's it. Just there are several slides of references here, and we will be posting these later on. So just wanted to let you know that they will be coming up there.
Hello and good morning or good afternoon, I don't know, to all. My name is Juan Val, and I am a principal researcher at the ASTI Marine Research Institute in the Basque Country in Spain, and the general coordinator of the Wave Energy in the Southern Europe project. So I'm going to present some of the underwater noise monitoring results that we have done in the framework of the WES project. And I will do that in collaboration with Teresa Simas from Benthic in Portugal, and on behalf of Ivan Felix from the CTN of Cartagena in Spain, and Erika Cruz from Benthic in Portugal as well. So the content of the presentation is divided in 3 main parts. The first section, in which I would like to explain very briefly what the WES project lead. A second section that will be explained by Teresa Simas, and which we will show you some of the first results obtained in relation to the underwater noise around wave energy devices. And finally, some remarks about the lessons learned until this moment in the project in relation with this monitoring work of underwater noise. So, okay, the OES project has been funded by the European Union and was launched in November 2018 and will run until 2021. And the main objective of the project consists on the increasing of the current knowledge on environmental impacts of wave energy projects. And this better knowledge will help us to better inform the decision makers and managers of the environmental real risks of these projects and reduce the uncertainty in the environmental consenting processes and do a better maritime spatial planning approach, specifically in Spain and Portugal. So the team of the project is constituted by scientific and industrial partners. Among the scientific partners, we have the WAVEC and Hydromod. Hydromod is a partner that we share with the previous project, explained by Matthew. And the other one are ASTI and the CTM from Cartagena in Spain. And among the industrial partners, we have the Biscay Marine Energy platform, the BIMET site in Spain, and two device developers, IDOM and wave roller developers in Finland. These partners are crucial because they give us the opportunity to monitor around devices that they have installed in real conditions in the sea. So as usual, the project is divided in different work packets. In this presentation, we will focus on the work package 2 of the project, devoted to the monitoring works to be undertaken around wave energy devices. But of course, we have other work packets for different activities. For instance, the work package 3 that is devoted to the modelization of environmental impacts in order to contribute to the overall understanding of potential cumulative impacts of future larger scale wave energy deployments. The work package 4 devoted to the development of country-specific licensing guidance, including recommendation on good practices to streamline the consenting procedures. Work package 5, which is devoted to the development and implementation of decision support tools for maritime spatial planning, for site selection of future wave energy developments. And finally, the work package 6 that is devoted to the development of a data platform, the Marine Data, which is a data platform that we share with the Seawave project. Okay, getting to the heart of the matter, that is the environmental monitoring works to be undertaken in the WEST project. The objective of this monitoring is to collect, process, and analyze and share environmental data collected around devices operating in rare conditions. Devices that represent different types of technology, location, and therefore different types of marine environment, onshore, nearshore, and offshore. And as I said before, our industrial partners have given us in May 2018 the opportunity to monitor around 2 different devices. The IDOM Marmok installed in the BIMET test site and the Montijo wave power plant in Spain. And this year, we expect to undertake similar monitoring works around the wave roller device installed in Benthic in Portugal. Okay, this environmental monitoring has been focused in 3 of the priority areas of research identified by the State of the Science report developed by Andrea Koppen and collaborators in 2016 These are underwater noise emissions, the impact of seafloor integrity, and the electromagnetic field. But in this presentation, we want to show you specifically some of the first results of the underwater noise emissions obtained around Marmok and Mutriku Wave Power Plant in May in 2019. The analysis of the other results related with seafloor integrity and electromagnetic field are still under work. So, okay, in this moment, I would like to give way to my partner, Teresa Simas, who will explain you the methodology and the main results of and conclusion obtained in relation to underwaterness. So, Teresa.
Hello, everyone. So my role here is try to explain the methodology and also some of the results that we got from the devices that were installed in Spain. One of them is still there, the Mutriku one. So we did this using two main approaches that we call the one static one and the other one the mobile one, because for the static one we were trying to understand what or to characterize the sources of noise for each device, or the type of noise they were producing. And for the mobile approach, we used several sampling points to understand what is the sound propagation around the area. So regarding the static measurements, we deploy a passive acoustic sensor in each location for a period of 45 days at BMAP and Mutriku, and we have some pictures showing the locations. Please, next slide, please, Juan. So this slide shows where we put the static setup of hydrophones that you can see on the right. So actually, it is very, very simple. It's with a subsurface buoy. Then the hydrophone was placed 1 meter below the surface. And then we have this acoustic release in order to know where the location, where the hydrophone was deployed when we want to recover it. So we, on the image in the center, you can see the mooring lines and the red spot that shows where the device was, and to the top you can see the location where we put the devices. So you have a number of pictures showing how the setup was mounted on the seabed. So this was made for BMAP, I think. So next slide, please. So this is the location for the underwater noise for the fixed or static measurement at Mutriku. So the device, the setup was put near the device too. Juan, can you please point where it is? I don't know if you can do it. Yeah. So far from the plant, but the idea was to collect the old sound that was produced by it in both cases. Next slide, please. For the mobile surveys, we measured different locations around each device with a total of 17 sampling stations in BMAP and around the Mutriku too, during a short period of time, 5 minutes each sampling point. And the same equipment was used for the measurements. Well, this is the brand of the hydrophone that we used. Next slide, please. So these are the station points location for the points where we collected acoustic measurements for the sound propagation characterization for the Marmok device. Next slide, please. So this is the mobile measurements for the Mutriku OWC plant. around again, just to show you the picture. Again, take next slide, please. And now we come to the results. It's not much time to process all this information, but you can see graphs for the background noise that we measure before the device enters in the production, and during the device, when the device is deploying on the right. Different colors correspond to different sea wave heights, and we have also a bit of the sound that you can hear. I'm not sure if Juan, you can put your mobile phone next to your computer for us to hear the sound emitted by the MRE device. Not sure if this is going to work, but anyway. No, I don't think we are hearing anything. But anyway, well, no, we have very good, very nice.
We can send you this.
Yeah, well, then you can hear the records that we got from the sound emitted by the device, the MRE device. So for this slide, you can see that the background values are quite flat in frequency, increasing between 90 to 100 decibels for the different states of the sea. And there are peaks between 2 and 5 kilohertz due to the noise of the device's mooring chains. Actually, this is the type of noise that we can much hear in the records that we cannot show to you now. But anyway, it's most of the noise that we can hear there. With the device turned on, localized increase appears mainly between 40 and 200 Hertz, reaching levels of 110 decibels, and thus increasing the intensity of the noise less than 13 decibels. This is for the Mutrico case. In the case of, the MRE case, in the case of Mutrico, there's a background noise intensity increase with the frequency of the noise. It should be noted that as the wave height increases, the intensity of the sound increases slightly, but for sea wave heights between 1 and 2 meters. There's a high increase between 200 hertz that we believe this increase is not strictly natural, so there's here we need to focus more on why this is happening. With the device on, we observed some increases in the radiated noise, but they do not exceed 4 decibels with respect to the background noise. So this means that there's not much difference between the background noise and the device when the device is on. So next slide, please.
Sorry.
Okay, for this one, we have here the results that we obtained for the sound propagation around MRE and Mutrico, and you can see that on the sound propagation was divided per frequency, per sound frequency, and you can see that the noise intensity is higher for low frequency noise. And this is somewhat a thing that is that you can observe for both types of devices. MRE is an offshore device, and Mutrico is a nearshore device. But anyway, the type of the higher intensity is obtained for lower frequencies, lower frequency noise. On the right, sorry. You can see we showed the average SPL. SPL means sound pressure level or intensity, sound intensity, based on the distance from the device. And we have two sets of curves, some with values above 110 decibels and others below. The first ones present high values due either to the proximity of the hydrophone with the surface, in the case of the MRE device, or to the proximity of both, because there's a lot of other noise sources around. The second set of curves show a slight decrease in the sound pressure level of around 5 decibels at 1,000 meters depth. In the Motricos case, at right, we see the SPL more in line with expectations, in all cases below 110 decibels, with a decreasing up to 10 decibels in 1,000 meters depth. You can see that also a very, well, actually it's common sense, but you can see in the graphs on the upper graphs for the MRE that the sound propagation almost is reduced in the next to the device, whereas in the Motrico case it propagates to a bigger distance because the depth is not so it's shallow, so it's the depth is lower. Okay, as conclusions, next slide, please. So this is a bit too technical, but anyway, the sound pressure level peaks around 2,500 hertz, corresponding to the noise of the mooring chains mainly. We can hear in the record. So with the device off, this sound pressure level increase with background as expected. With the device on, the intensity of the noise peaks around 40 to 120 hertz frequencies, and we can see that there's different intensity increments depending on the wave height, so they are quantified there. Depending on the range, SPL decrease up to 5 decibels in 1,000 meters. For the Motrico, with the device off, there's an anomaly in sound pressure level increase between 200 hertz for between 1 and 2 meters. With the device on, the sound pressure level increased just 4 decibels below 200 hertz of frequency. And depending on the range, the noise intensity decrease up to 10 decibels in, until 1,000 meters depth. And with this, I will pass the word to Juan again for the, I guess, the last slide.
Yes, okay. Thanks, Teresa. Yes, for finalizing some lessons learned that we have seen in this monitoring work. They are closely related with the weather windows for field works. When sea conditions are bad, the safety during field works could be compromised. As you can see in this picture on the left, taken on the 6th of May during the field works, we have experienced strong wind and moderately wave height that make us very difficult to undertake the field works. And on the opposite, when the sea conditions are calm and more comfortable for field work, sound emissions coming from the device could be not enough to detect any impact. This is what happens. You can see here on the right. This is the next day, the 7th of May. The sea was totally calm, but the device doesn't make any sound. So on our view, the fixed stations for continuous and long-term monitoring are more suitable instead of punctual mobile monitoring. But these methodologies need to be designed in such a way that they could be able to evaluate the directionality of sound for interior analysis of sound propagation. So, for instance, I don't know, installing more than one fixed station at the same time in different locations around the devices.
Thank you very much, Juan and Teresa. Great overview. We have one question you might want to try to answer now, and then there may be some more later. I guess this is directed mostly at Teresa. How did the underwater sound results of the MARMOC device compare to a typical moored oceanographic buoy? And similarly, how did the metrico noise compare with a typical breakwater? Have you looked at those?
Yeah, well, these are two very interesting questions, but we don't have yet answers for them because we are just having these results and we are waiting for the wave roller ones in order to start our interpretations around this. But, well, I anticipate that there's a lot of similarities between devices and these mooring lines of, for instance, for the buoys, oceanographic buoys. Because the main noise that we hear from the MARMOC device are coming from the mooring lines. So maybe at least for this type of devices, this ocean oscillating water column, where the main noise is made out of water, because the chamber is actually above the sea surface. So I believe that these kind of devices will behave in terms of noise propagation as the oceanographic buoys, where most part of the noise comes from the chains, the mooring chains. But of course, this is just for this type of devices. It might be that other devices that are working underwater, as wave roller, for instance, it is a device that works all underwater, the results will be different. So this is the kind of work that we are expecting to do afterwards. So these are just our preliminary results from these two devices, but we are working and we will have more results from the wave roller one, and then we will for sure make these comparisons between breakwaters and between oceanographic buoys and similar structures at sea that are not connected with other type of noise.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to this last presentation for today about wave energy and environmental studies, insights from the Lysekil research site in Sweden. My name is Anke Bender and I'm a PhD student in Uppsala University. I would also like to mention other people involved in the studies I'm going to mention now, which is Jan Sundberg, Olivia Langhammer, Kalle Heikkinen, and Francisco, and of course many more persons. In this talk, I'm going to summarize the activities in the Lysekil research site with a focus on environmental studies. Wave energy research on a linear wave power generator, as you can see here in the picture, is conducted by Uppsala University since the early 2000s. And practical and theoretical research takes place in Uppsala and at the Lysekil research site at the west coast of Sweden. And this study has been studied for environmental impacts from wave energy generators on the local fauna since the beginning of the project. And for example, all EIA investigations for the project have been conducted in-house via personnel of Uppsala University. To give you an impression on the location, I mentioned earlier, I want to show you this map. And this map shows the southern part of Sweden. The location of Uppsala and its university is here on the right here upper side of the slide. And the location of the research site is on the west coast, here with the generators. And of course, this the reason for that is that the wave climate here was more suitable for the devices, for the study. So in the last years, 4 different projects focused on environmental studies in the site, and of course each project involves work of several persons for several years, and it's impossible to summarize it in a slide. So I'm just going to give you a short impression on the topics which have been covered. And the first project was about Benthic infauna, biofouling, and artificial reef effects. And in the second project, the focus laid on acoustic studies during the deployment and during the operation. The third project involves development of monitoring tripods and the use of sonars. And the last and ongoing project is a follow-up long-term investigation on artificial reef effects from the first project, and it also focuses on the wave park as a no-take zone. And in the upcoming slides, I will say a couple of more words to each project. So the first project focused on Benthic infauna assemblages in the wave power park and in control sites. Sediment core samples were taken for this analysis, and it revealed higher biomass diversity and abundances in the park compared to nearby control. However, abundances in general were low, but higher in the wave power park. Furthermore, biofouling estimations especially on the buoy were conducted, and blue mussels appear to be the main biofouling species. However, even though the amount was pretty high, you can see that also here in the pictures. I guess some of you also know this kind of effect. These are the blue mussels here, and then you see some of the retrieved devices which show a lot of biofouling on the device. It was not affecting the amount of blue mussels was not affecting the device itself. And then visual surveys to assess the artificial reef effect have been done, and this has been picked up in a follow-up study I will talk about in a couple of minutes. And shortly after the deployment already of the devices, a reef effect was found, or was detected. The second project focused on acoustic studies, and this is, it was earlier mentioned today, it's of interest because sound or water is very dense and sound travels fast and far. So, and also the variation in the ability to perceive sound from the different species living in the ocean is very different, from mammals to invertebrates and so on. So this was the background of the study, and hydrophones were installed at the site, and recordings were done during deployment and also operations. And the recordings reveal that the noise from the generator is not expected to have negative or big effects on the behavior or mass signals unless in the vicinity close to the wreck in significant wave heights, and vicinity means here closer than 150 meters. Since our park doesn't contain too many devices, it's not a problem there, but of course it needs to be further investigated if we're talking about a park with 1,000 or 2,000 devices, and then there could be some effects for traveling or migrating species, blocking rates. But so far this didn't have any severe effects. And the picture shows a temporal amplitude when the translator hits the end stop of the spring, the end stop spring, and a spectrogram of it. And actually, with the help of the hydrophone recordings, an adjustment could be done on the devices. So due to the recordings, an adjustment could be done, and this is not such such a problem anymore. In the third project, a monitoring tripod has been developed and successfully deployed to monitor marine mammals and also fish, and also to monitor the device. The tripod contained 3 different sonars, and as I mentioned, the sonars were used to both monitor the devices but also the environment, mainly mammals and fish. And this system has a lot of advantages. It's comparably cheap, safer than, for example, divers, and one big advantage is that it can be deployed and it can stay for for a certain time period in the ocean, and by that even recording during harsh weather conditions are possible, which is often a problem during let's say classical sampling, where you need to go when the weather condition allows you to go. And on the picture here, you see a couple of applications with this device. Here you have the schematic of the tripod, and of course we have been using it around this wave power device, and also this marine current turbine, which was developed in Uppsala University as well. But of course there is it's a multifunctional application. The artificial reef studies I mentioned previously from the first project were continued in a follow-up long-term investigation, and a local increase in biodiversity, number of individuals, and species richness was found on the foundations compared, like very locally on the foundations compared to the control. A crustacean community study around or in the wave park and in the area around with 2 different cage models. On the other hand, showed that there was no difference between the community of crustaceans in the park compared to the control site we sampled. However, in another, so close to the site I'm focusing on now, the Lysekil site, there's another area with generators which has slightly different conditions. It's a bit further out, a bit deeper, and it's also highly fished around that area. And we did a similar crustacean community assessment there. And what we found there is that with a distance to the park, the number of individuals decreased, and we are really suspecting that this could be some effect of this no-take zone from the park, because the park is closed for any marine activities, but around the park quite heavy fishing, trawling, and also cage fishing is going on. And with this slide, I'm going to wrap up the talk and also the studies. In the first study, the infauna biomass, it was higher around the foundations than in the control sites. Few mussels were the main biofouling species on the wave power buoys. The acoustic studies reveal that noise is not expected to have an impact or a big impact unless in the vicinity of closer than 150 meters to the wreck and in significant wave heights. We had a successful use of the sonar tripods for detection of fish and marine mammal occurrences in the park, and also to monitor the wave power device. And in the follow-up long-term study on artificial reef effects were locally detected, very locally, but in our crustacean community study, we didn't find any differences between the park and the control areas. And I would like to thank you for that you listened, for your attention. Thank you.
So that's the end of our presentations. We do have some questions, and I'd like to encourage the participants to add questions to the chat box if you like. So just dialing back here a little, here is a question for Matthew. Where is it? I lost it again. Okay. Do you think, Matthew, that it's possible to add a camera to ID species to your mooring lines? when you do the echo sounder backscatter. In other words, to try to correlate between the what you're seeing on the acoustic backscatter and who's actually doing it.
I have done stuff like that before, but for a totally different project. It kind of is possible, but you ultimately need the animals. If they're benthic species, then that would be problematic because using acoustics near the seabed is challenging. If it's mid-water species, then I suppose you have to hope you've actually got animals in front of the camera at the same time as you're doing your underwater acoustics. All of our fisheries acoustics is kind of active, as in we don't have seabed-mounted EK80s, where if you did have a camera system, you could definitely do quite a nice study with that, with a EK80 next to a camera, and then duty cycle them on and off. So then you get your acoustic characterization and a confirmation of species.
Great, thank you. A question for Anki. Were there any differences in the biofouling assemblages on the wave energy device itself versus its moorings? Were blue mussels dominant on both?
I must say, first of all, I was not involved personally in that study, but one thing I can say is that blue mussels were dominant, as I said, on the buoy, and since the devices are further, I mean, they're standing on like 25 meters in that study, on 25 meters depth, it is a different. Sorry, it is a different community. It is dominated by how to say now I'm missing the word, anonymon. No, can someone? I cannot say the word. Yeah, exactly. I cannot say this word. Exactly, it's dominated by this species. Yes.
Anemones.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's a hard one. Yeah.
Sorry. I practiced that word actually beforehand because I saw the picture of it, but it's impossible for me to pronounce it.
Anemones. Yeah, it's a hard word in many languages. Wonderful. Thank you. So I see there's a question to me about EMF. Do we anticipate potentially significant effects from EMF of dynamic cabling, particularly as projects scale up to arrays? So the question is about the fact that if you had multiple wave devices, you would have electrical cable between devices and then probably going down to the seafloor from a single device and then the export cable to shore. So those cables that are in the water column. We have looked at this. There really aren't any studies. And it's an interesting situation because if the EMF from the export cable along the seabed is collecting power from multiple devices, if the EMF is sufficiently low out of those seabed cables, then you have to assume the ones in the water column are lower yet. But what mitigates that is you can bury the seabed cable, of course, or you can armor it and cover it. It's much harder to do that with the cables in the water column because the weight becomes prohibitive and breaks the cable. We have modeled this, and based on what we know of these cables, and it appears that the EMF signature, the magnetic signature, only travels about half a meter or a little more before it dissipates in the water. Now that's a model, of course, and so it would be really good to measure some of that. But it's been brought to our attention by some of the EMF experts that we really don't understand different cable sizes and configurations, twists, and how they're put together, how much the magnetic signature will be coming out of that in seawater. So this is probably a project that could be done in the laboratory, actually, to really measure a whole series of different kinds of cable and what their output is. And that would certainly help to inform these models. But at this point, there hasn't been an awful lot done, though. So let's see, other questions. Here's another question for Anki. Are you using export cables for the tested devices, the wave devices? And if so, were there any differences in the benthic communities on those export cables versus, I guess, the seabed?
Yes. So there are cables. I must say we didn't do studies on those, but when we go diving on the generator, so in the site, you see the cables sometimes, but very often they're also appearing, disappearing in the sun. So there's not much growing on those. That's what I can just say from personal visual observations. So I guess it's the physical disturbance which keeps them kind of clean. And yeah, it's sometimes seaweed entangled, but it's not much growing on the cables itself.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions I'm seeing, but I'm sharing my screen now, so I'm not really seeing them. Are there others?
There was one other, Andrea, that was asked up top, that was for you. As devices are deployed at packways, what are the primary environmental impacts they will study?
Oh, okay. So the PackWave site is really being modeled to a large extent on EMEC, the European Marine Energy Center, as far as being able to pre-consent or pre-permit as much of the work as possible. So when developers go in there, they will have less to do. Now, the different regulatory regimes in the two countries may change this a little bit, and it's clear that every developer who goes into the site will have to do some aspect of data collection and permitting. But what they are trying to do is look at sort of design envelopes for different kinds of devices. You know, point absorbers, there's these issues, oscillating water columns, maybe a different set of issues. But I think it's most probable that every developer will have to do a little bit of that data collection. But probably most important, being run by Oregon State University, there will be ongoing looks at benthic disturbance. So what happens in terms of installation and recovery and operation on the benthic communities. I believe there will be some ongoing noise measurements taken. The EMF work may or may not be repeated there, and there will certainly, I suspect, this whole issue as the test center builds up, the issue of placement, particularly as there's large migratory whale species going through there, will be taken. But I think a lot of that is still a little bit up in the air. They're still working that through. Great. I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. I want to point out this is the first of these forums we've carried out. We'd like to do another one in sort of the 2 to 6 month time frame, assuming there is interest. And that really is based on the participants, those presenting and those that are listening. We'd really like to hear about some topics of interest. You could put some in the chat box right now, and including some suggested speakers. And if you have comments later on, if you could send them to Dory Overhouse, whose email is up here on the screen, or respond to any of us on here. We would really like to know what areas of interest there are. In future forums, we'd really like to spend probably a little less time presenting and time in discussion. We would like to put forward some discussion questions for participation. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you very much for attending, and most of all, I'd like to thank our speakers today. I think this was a really great lineup of presentations from a number of different countries. Okay, so with that, I'd like to say goodbye, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Stay safe.